Welcome to our Fearless Money Talk. Today, we are going to talk specifically about breaking money silence. My name is Angela Renee. I will be moderating today's discussion, and I currently serve as Administrative Director and Senior Client Service Manager at Halbert Hargrove. And we'd like to start by inviting you to consider what it was about this topic that interested you and prompted you to sign up to listen to today's discussion. As I've been preparing for today's event, I've actually been posing that question to myself as the moderator. I've been asking, where have I been silent about money, and what is the reason for that? And I've realized a couple of things. For me personally, money is tied to security. And so talking about it can leave me feeling vulnerable. But what I've also realized, and this is because I've had a little peek behind the curtain on the content you are about to hear, is that by protecting myself from that feeling of vulnerability, I'm actually leaving myself vulnerable to other feelings that I don't really like fear and uncertainty. So that's the connection for me, why breaking money silence is important. And we hope that today you will make a connection for yourself personally. So we have 3 experts to guide you in that exploration today. And before I introduce them, I just want to give you a few logistics. We have changed our format for this webinar, and that is on purpose. That's because later when we get to the question and answer phase, we'll invite you to turn on your videos so we can connect names to faces. There's no pressure to do that if you're not comfortable, but we want to open the invitation. And whether you turn your video on then or not, we invite you to engage in the chat box. We see someone has already come in with a question. We appreciate that. We want this to feel as community oriented as possible. So as the content unfolds, please tell us what's resonating and also post your questions there. We'll be monitoring them throughout and return to them at the question and answer phase. Our only request in the chat box, of course, because we want to keep this safe and a kind environment, is to be considerate there and to moderate your comments as you go. We'll also be dropping resources in the chat box. You'll see there's already a downloadable worksheet there. And please stick around for the end because we will have a special offer for those who do. So let's jump in. I'd like to introduce you to our first panelist. We have a special guest today, and I am delighted to introduce you to Kathleen Burns Kingsbury. Kathleen is a wealth psychology expert and coach. She is the founder of KBK Wealth Connection. She's also the host of the Breaking Money Silence podcast. I have personally found that to be a really great resource. I encourage you to check it out. And Kathleen's mission is to empower women, couples, and families, and the advisors who serve them to shatter money taboos and communicate more effectively about financial matters. So Kathleen, I'm going to take myself off video and mute myself so that you have the floor, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen. Let me get up my PowerPoint before you are going to get a quick picture of my girlfriends and I mountain biking. And then you will get the slideshow. Angela, can you just confirm that we can see the slides okay?
I can see them great.
Excellent. So we will get started. Thank you so much, Angela, and everybody at Halbert Hargrove. I'm really excited to talk about this topic of breaking money silence across generations. It certainly is one of those fearless money talks, and it tends to be a conversation or a series of conversations that people find to be somewhat taboo. But today we're going to break that taboo. I'm going to share with you why now is such a wonderful time to engage in conversations with your either aging parents, your children, your partners, your friends, your advisors, and specifically offer 3 different tactics for how to do so. But before we get into the tactics, I want to just start by giving you a little context as to what breaking money silence is and why it's so important. So the first thing I want to share with you is, unfortunately, we still live in a culture that is full of money shame. And money shame is that shame is that feeling that it isn't that you've done something bad, but somehow you are bad. And unfortunately, our relationships with money are sometimes complex, not even sometimes, always are complex. And it leads us to feel very mixed emotions when we do make a financial mistake or we think about sharing something around money with somebody else. And so here are a few statistics to just show how different generations and genders are impacted by living in this culture with the money talk taboo and shame. 74% of Gen Xers and boomers actually feel embarrassed or regret when sharing a financial mistake. You may be in that category too. I know sometimes I feel that way. And typically the reason that we feel so embarrassed or feel regret around making a financial mistake is that we often feel like we should be perfect around money, although that's impossible if we're human beings. And I think if we don't share our financial mistakes, it's hard to learn and grow and move on in our relationship with money and plan for the financial future. Often people will say to me, well, Kathleen, that's the boomers, but what about the millennials? They talk about everything. Well, as you can see, money shame hits the millennials as well, with 84% of them hiding their restaurant expenses from their advisors. This, again, I think, is the fear of judgment that somehow you're managing or spending your money incorrectly, when ultimately it's up to each and every one of us to decide how we're going to use our money, how we're going to spend it, invest it, and gift it. And when you look at the culture of money shame and you look specifically at women, what you find is that 61% of women would rather talk about their own death, yes, their own death, than talk about money with somebody else. Now, you may be the exception to that rule. Just so you know, for all the men out there, they don't have a specific male stat, but about 44% of Americans are afraid to talk about money with others and would rather talk about death, dying, or politics. So this money shame hits all genders and all generations. And so I have decided that it's really important, along with your advising team as well, that we need to break money silence. And so let me tell you a little bit about what I think of as money silence and define it for you, and then also show you how it may be impacting you, even if you're not aware of it. So money silence is that uncomfortable feeling that many of us get when we're talking about money. It could be talking about the dollars and cents, like asking someone their salary or admitting how much you spent on a particular item. Or it could be the emotions around money, not feeling comfortable talking about what money means to you, or really addressing your values around money, or thinking about how you use money to express your emotions, your caring, your respect, your control, these types of things. So money silence is that uncomfortable feeling we get when we're trying to talk about money, and it impacts all of us. It actually tends to be a global phenomenon as well. And the reason we need to break money silence is because it has a very harmful effect, not only on ourselves and our relationship with money, but on our relationships with other people and our ability to plan for the future and pass on wealth. And so the high price for money silence is evident in a variety of different areas. If we look at, say, couples, right? 44% of adults admit to keeping a money secret from their partner. That's almost half of us keep money secrets from our partner. Now, it could be anything from a huge money secret to something that's a little bit smaller, like, oh, yesterday I bought this sweater and I didn't tell my husband. But either way, keeping money secrets from your partner is another way in which we express our discomfort around money. And while secrets can vary in terms of size and impact on the relationship, just know that the inability to handle financial conflict is one of the key contributors in divorce. So if you want to have a good marriage, often talking about money and being able to resolve conflicts around money is part of that. The next way in which money silence really hurts us is it hurts families and it hurts our ability to raise financially fit and financially prepared kids. One survey found that 2/3 of affluent Americans had never talked to their kids about money or had not yet talked to their kids about money. And so what that means is it's really hard to learn financial skills if you aren't able to share a roadmap, to have these conversations about what money means to them, how to use wealth, the purpose of wealth, how to manage money from the technical side. And then the other thing that happens, which many of you may have heard this stat before, that 60% of families fail to successfully pass down wealth across generations. And it's not because of the legal or technical aspects that trip families up. It's this uncomfortable feeling talking about money, the lack of communication around money, and the lack of trust. And so the price of money silence is just way too high for our society, for couples, for families, and probably for all of you. There's also an especially high price for women. Women's relationship with money is complex and confusing, and certainly a topic for another day. But I wanted to include these statistics because I think it's important. When we look at just women, you'll find that when women business owners go to get loans from banks, they get 33% loan approvals. 40% of female breadwinners, so women who have earning power, downplay their earning status to friends and family because, again, they're fearing they will be judged. And while the gender wage gap is much, much more complicated than just talking about money, it is a key contributor, money silence, and that 500 billion annually is lost in the United States due to this gender wage gap in women's, part of it being women's discomfort talking about money. But I just don't want to be a Debbie Downer and tell you all the things that are wrong with our society and how this money talk taboo is pervasive, because I actually have hope. I have hope for the future. And you should have hope for the future as well. In fact, millennials and Gen Zs are our hope. But before I share the next statistic with you, I want to have us do a quick poll. And so the poll is going to be launched. I have it on the screen, but you'll see it pop up right now. And what I'd love for you to do is just participate in the poll. We'll leave it open for a few seconds and have you answer this question. What percentage of millennials think talking about money is healthy for our society? Do you think it's 23%, 56%, or 71%? And I'll give you a minute to kind of click in your answer there and just get a pulse on where we think the millennials are at. Or you may even be a millennial on the line and have a sense of where you're at. Okay, so we're going to give it maybe 10 more seconds, and then we're going to share the results. So I am not sure if everybody can see the results, so I'll read them off. 15% of us thought it was 23%, 35% thought it 56%, and 71% said, I'm sorry, 50% said it was 71%. Anyway, the bottom line is, with all those percentages, didn't mean to overwhelm me or you with those percentages, is that you're right. 71% of millennials agree with this statement. So that's a large percent of the next generation feels that society would be healthier if we talked about money. The dilemma is millennials, just like the other generations, lack a roadmap for how to do so. So even though we want to, and we're moving towards talking about this taboo topic, it's really important for all of us to learn skills and tactics to do so, and so we can engage in these fearless money talks. The other thing that I think is a real opportunity, believe it or not, is the pandemic. The pandemic has forced each and every one of us, no matter what our socioeconomic status is, to realize that maybe we need to engage in more money conversations with people in our lives. Sometimes we've been forced to, sometimes it's because we've been stressed out about our finances. Sometimes it's because we've been thrown all in the same house together and these conversations come up. But as you can see, when it comes to women who are often, or at least historically have been, the folks to get these conversations going in families, that the pandemic has positively impacted them. 68% of women in this survey that was just done in January of 2021 find that they discuss money more with their partners since the pandemic, and 48% of women say they discuss their inheritance with their kids more since the pandemic. So while this has been a horrible situation for all of us, there is a silver lining when it comes to having a fearless money talk. I truly believe when we can't feel in control of so many things that are going on in the world, we can control how we interact with money and how we talk about money and how we plan on passing down wealth and increasing these skills in this area. So that's really, I think, kind of the excitement and why I think it's such an important time to break money silence. So now that you know very quickly kind of the overview as to the cost of money silence, why it's important to break your money silence, and how now is the time, let's spend the rest of our time in this workshop together talking about the tactics that are going to get you there. And so the first tactic we're going to talk about today is identifying your money talk mindset. Now, my background is in financial psychology and also in communication. So everything that I think about and that I, present to audiences and work with clients on has to do with money psychology. And so I truly believe if we get some insight into our relationship with money and talking about money and start to understand where our strengths and challenges are, we'll do a better job and feel more equipped to engage in these conversations. So we're going to drill down in a minute into what a money talk mindset really is, and then we're going to give you an experience of starting to tap into yours. After that, we're going to explore what I call key influencers. So our money talk mindset, or our ability to talk about money, is really impacted by so many things. But there are 6 key influencers that I will review and share with you a quick case study that will give you some insight into how you think about these conversations and also how your conversational partner might be thinking about these conversations. And then lastly, we will talk about how do you practice wealth conversations? How do you engage with the next generation or your elderly parent or your partner and dare to have one of these fearless conversations? So let's start with money talk mindsets. It is one of my favorites. So what is a money talk mindset? A mindset, as you know, is a set of beliefs, a way of thinking that determines our behaviors, our outlook, and our mental attitudes. And so a money talk mindset is our automatic thoughts and beliefs about engaging in conversations about money that are automatic. So it's automatic thoughts and beliefs. So where do these automatic thoughts and beliefs come from? And maybe you haven't even thought about this. Many people haven't. But our money talk mindset is formed when we are very young, between the ages of 5 and 15. So very young, from the time we are aware that money exists to our adolescent years. And we typically learn to talk about money, not talk about money, that couples fight about money, that, maybe it should be a topic we should avoid. We typically learn all these things by observing important caregivers in our lives. That could be parents, that could be grandparents, it could be teachers, mentors. And we kind of unconsciously develop this whole mindset. Now, sometimes, some of us are lucky and we had parents or teachers that sat down and talked to us about engaging in these conversations, but not most of us. So what ends up happening with a money talk mindset is it tends to be very all or nothing thinking, very childlike thinking, because these thoughts were formed in our childhood. And it tends to be something that we're not aware of. And so I'm convinced if you're not aware of it, it's hard to change it. But if you can bring it to the surface, if you can bring these unconscious thoughts to the surface, then you can do something about it. Now, our mindset in a variety of areas impacts our behaviors. Again, if you're aware of what your thoughts are, then you can say, maybe I need to shift or change that thought, and that can change my behavior. But if these thoughts are in your unconscious mind or you're not aware of them, it becomes hard to change. You can feel kind of stuck, like, well, this is just the way I am. And so part of the work, and part of what we're going to have some fun doing here today, is uncovering those automatic thoughts that impact your behaviors. And the way this model works, and if anybody's been in cognitive therapy as a therapist, has studied psychology 101, you may recognize this triangle. But basically what this triangle represents is what happens for each and every one of us each time we have an automatic thought. So we have a thought, and just like that, we have an emotion and a behavior. And this cycle happens so fast that we often aren't even aware it's happening. So suppose I don't know, you're going to an advisor's meeting and you're going in with your partner and your thought is, oh, I dread advisor meetings. My partner does all the talking. I sometimes don't know what the advisor's talking about. And then emotions, you'd feel, oh, kind of dread. I'm going to go because I told my partner I'd go. And your behavior may be you sit in the room, you don't fully pay attention, or you opt out of the meeting the next time. But one of your thought automatically was, as you head to the advisor meeting, oh, this is exciting. We're going to get to talk about money and we're going to get updated on what our financial plan is. Your emotions would be more upbeat, and you'd anticipate in a good way this meeting, and you'd probably make a big commitment, not only to be present during that advisor's meeting, but also to attend future advisor meetings with your partner. So our thoughts really do impact our emotions and ultimately impact our behaviors. So to shift how we think and feel about money, and specifically engaging in money conversations, the first step is figuring out what those little automatic thoughts are that you have in your mind. And so this is where we're going to do an interactive exercise. Because even though we live in a virtual world right now, I love interacting with my audiences. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read off a series of 5 statements in a minute. And I am going to have you complete those statements with whatever comes to mind. Now, if you are like me, I'm an older Gen Xer, I would grab a piece of paper and write it down, what my responses are. You may be somebody that prefers to type it into your phone, or maybe you're just gonna wanna jot it down in your head. Although I have to tell you, if you're doing this exercise, it's more valuable to do it if you write it down or type it somewhere. So we are going to go through this exercise pretty quickly. Again, I'm going to read off a statement and you're just going to complete it. Now, the only other thing you need to know before I do this is after this, we are going to share, but it's up to you what you share and how you share. So I want you to be as honest as you can be with this part of the process, because you will get the most out of it. And again, going to go quick because we're doing automatic thoughts. So here's the first statement I want you to complete with whatever pops in your mind. There's no right or wrong answers. You don't have to be politically correct, and no one else is going to see it. So talking about money with my loved ones is. Talking about money with my loved ones is. Talking to my adult children about money is. If you don't have adult children, you might have nieces or nephews, or you might decide, I'm going to put in my parents in here instead. So talking to my adult children, or talking to my adult nieces and nephews, or talking to my parents about money is, whatever you choose to use. The financial topic I find the most difficult to discuss is. What's that topic you just dread talking about? Interesting enough, the most difficult usually pops up pretty quickly for people. Now, the converse to this is the financial topic I find the easiest to discuss. What's the easiest financial topic for you to discuss? And last, the biggest fear I have when it comes to money talk or engaging in financial conversations is. We all have them. Professionals, experts, and people. The biggest fear I have when it comes to money talk is. Okay, so Now that you've jotted down your automatic thoughts and beliefs in this abbreviated exercise, your Money Talk mindset exercise, I want you to think about, just ponder, how does your mindset impact your money conversations? What typically happens for people is we both have strengths in our Money Talk mindset, areas that make us really good at engaging in certain types of financial conversations. And we often have some blind spots, some areas that we could work on. So this is the part that's going to be interactive. What I would like you to do, and I'm going to do it along with you, if I can find my little bar, is, I would like you to go to the chat section. And I would like you to type in, what is one of your strengths of your Money Talk mindset? What is one strength of your Money Talk mindset? So just go in the chat and just type it right in. I'm going to everybody, I'm not going to read out your names. If you feel uncomfortable doing it to everybody, just pick my name, Kathleen Kingsbury. And again, I won't read your names. I just want to get a couple of thoughts about what are people's strengths. I read books to learn more. That's a strength about a Money Talk mindset. I know for me, I love talking about taboo topics. Doesn't mean my partner or my friends always do. So what's one strength? Just type it into the chat of your Money Talk mindset. The ability to be vulnerable, my willingness to have frank discussions. Okay, what is, here's one more. I talked to my teenage son about saving, investing, and spending every day. Openness, great. These are all great strengths. My single mom instilled that these tools are everyone needs, no matter what your age. Open-minded to other ideas, being willing to learn every day. So a lot of good things here in strengths. So everybody has a strength around a Money Talk mindset. So here's a little, it's going to require you to be a little vulnerable. Just list one blind spot or one challenge you have with talking about money. It may be that it's the difficult money conversation you picked and you want to kind of remember that one for later, because we're going to circle back in the Q&A about that. But for now, what is one challenge of your Money Talk mindset? Scarcity mindset, worry about spending. I mind read. That's something I'll tell you not to do later. That's one of my challenges. I tell my husband what he's thinking, and my husband, Brian, doesn't appreciate that. Talking about spending, a challenge, moving into retirement. So the transition conversations, yeah. Avoid conversations because of fear of making things awkward. Knowing how much is enough, that's a great one. It's interesting because someone said talking about spending, and sometimes talking about spending can be somebody's strength and it could be somebody else's challenge. So just keep in mind that it's really important to acknowledge not only what your strengths are, but also what your challenges are. And that with money, it's a mixed bag. We often tend to just focus on the negative, and I don't think that that is so helpful. So you can keep these coming in if you would like. I'm going to move on just in terms of our time together. I want to make sure we get to the rest of the presentation, but thank you for playing with me a little bit. If you ever wanted to do an extended Money Talk mindset exercise, let us know and I can get you some information on that. So the first tactic was exploring Money Talk mindsets. And often, if you think about it, the way in which we talk about money or do not talk about money or feel just uncomfortable with these financial conversations, really what has influenced us so much is our families, right? The family money messages we grew up with. And this isn't about blaming mom and dad. This is about just being aware of what influences how I think and feel about money, what influences me when I'm engaging in these conversations. Well, there's also some other really key influencers when it comes to your ability to talk about money. And they're up on the screen right now. There's culture and race, gender, generation, religion or spirituality, your socioeconomic status, maybe where you came from, where you are now, and significant money events. And when I talk about significant money events, it doesn't have to be huge. It can be, but it doesn't have to be like I inherited 10 million or, my company went bankrupt. It could be something small. Like one client I worked with, she said, when I asked for a raise when I was a teenager and I was babysitting, I asked this family that I worked with for a year just for another $1 an hour, and they never called me back. So this ended up being a significant money event for her because in adulthood, she had trouble asking for a raise. And it wasn't until we did some money psychology work, money coaching work, that she realized that this event was quite significant in her mindset. So let me give you an example of how you can talk about your key influencers. Now, this is a woman, Lauren, on the screen. I actually interviewed her. She was on my podcast, Breaking Money Silence. But she really is a great example of how all of these key influencers are so important. Because if you looked at Lauren and you just saw her walk in a room, you would see a very attractive woman of color, young, but you wouldn't know much about her relationship with money. You might be able to make assumptions. They would be based on stereotypes and bias, and that wouldn't be good. We want to be open-minded, and we want to learn about the other person and not mind read. And so Lauren and I had this great conversation about her relationship with money and how these 6 key influencers impacted her. And so we started with culture and race. And I said, Lauren, tell me a little bit about, how you identify, what culture you were raised in. And she goes, I was raised in an African-American lower class neighborhood. And she goes, and my family was very, very poor. She goes, my dad was disabled and was on disability. My mom worked, but often was in between jobs. And in her upbringing, money was really a secret. She called it money privacy. And I said, what do you mean by that? She goes, well, we didn't have any money, so we kept it private and we never talked about it. I said, that's interesting. And so then we talked a little bit about how that impacted her ability to talk about money, at least initially when she started to acquire some. We talked about her gender and the fact that did being a woman in this world impact her relationship with money and her ability to talk about money. And she said that she didn't feel like it did. She didn't feel like her gender really influenced her, but being a Black woman, she felt like people made assumptions that weren't fair about how she got money, how hard she didn't work for money, and the fact that she married a white doctor and what that meant. So she said, indirectly, I guess my gender affects it a little bit, but I think women can do anything that anybody who identifies as male or as binary can do. And so we talked about her generation. She is an older millennial, and she said, you know what, my generation does impact how I think about money, how I think about earning money. And she goes, it impacts me in that as a millennial, I have a completely, and this was before the pandemic, a completely virtual business. And she goes, I use technology to really scale my business. She goes, but I kind of resent that millennials are seen as entitled and lazy and they don't work very hard. She goes, that has not been my experience at all. I'm a very hard worker. And so I don't like when people make that assumption about me and my relationship with money or my work. We talked about her spirituality. She had been raised a Christian. They had, even though they had very little money, tithe 10% every year annually to the church. And I said, well, have you continued that? Is that something that you learned about money as a kid and you continue to do? And she said, well, not directly. She goes, but indirectly, I do give about 10% to the different charity and causes that I really believe in. We went on to talk about the social economic status she identifies with now. Again, she came from a very low income house and neighborhood. And I said, how do you identify now? And she goes, actually, I would say I'm either upper middle class or maybe I would dare to say I'm affluent. I said, oh. I said, what was that transition like? And she goes, well, it was a little bumpy. She goes, you see, my name is Lauren Williams and I'm an Olympic athlete. Lauren, and you may or may not have recognized her, but she was an Olympic athlete, the first woman to win a medal in both the summer and the winter games, which is so cool to me. She did like bobsledding. How wonderful is that? But when she talked about her going from her socioeconomic status changing and going from being this person who grew up in a family without much money to earning six figures, to getting sponsorships, to, her world just blowing up, she said that was a very, very hard transition. She goes, I ended up working with an advisor that wasn't very ethical. I discovered that I didn't know much about money and I needed to learn more about money. She goes, I really think that's a big impact on why I think talking about money is so important now with my partner and with my advisor. And in fact, Lauren actually became a financial advisor herself, so she can coach and work with other people who are athletes who are making a similar transition. And so then when we got to significant money events, of course, her significant money event was becoming an Olympiad and going and changing socioeconomic statuses. So the reason that I share all of this with you is if you saw Lauren walk through the door and you decided to have a conversation with her about money, you could make all sorts of assumptions. Or you could ask her curious questions about all these different aspects, these key influencers, and how they impact her relationship with money. I encourage you to do what I did with Lauren in this podcast interview and ask yourself and ask the people in your life curious questions. And in fact, to make it really easy on you, in the handouts, we've included this questionnaire, which takes you through a series of questions that hit on these 6 key influencers. This is a great tool for you to use either yourself and get more aware of the different influences on your money talk mindset and your relationship with money. You can share it with your financial advisor and have a conversation about it. I also think it's a really cool thing for you and a partner to do, or you and your family to do. It kind of does, these different prompts can be really thought-provoking. And so download it, fill it out, use it as you see fit. And certainly if you are working with a financial advisor, definitely bring this to your next appointment, because I think it'll be really useful in continuing that relationship. So the third and final thing we're going to talk about, or tactic, is practicing actually having the money conversations. So if you identify, okay, this is what I think and feel about engaging in wealth conversations, these are the different influences in my life and why I think and feel this way about talking about money and finances and wealth, now you need to dare to have that fearless conversation and to practice these conversations. And so in order to do so, I have to tell you guidelines can be useful, right? So if you are engaging in a money talk, I encourage you to follow what I call the Kingsbury rules of fighting fair financially. I know, I like alliteration. That's why it's fighting fair financially. It comes from my book, Breaking Money Silence. And so this handout is also in your handout, so you don't have to squint and read it on the screen. But let me highlight a couple of key areas for you, and then you certainly can read it later. The first is, when you are engaging in a money conversation, it is so important to use I statements, to actively listen. And so you probably know that intellectually, we all do. It's a little bit harder to do when you're emotional, when you are having a conversation with a loved one. And so the difference is, like, if you felt somebody spent too much money, instead of saying, you spent too much money, you better stop spending too much money, saying, when you spend a lot of money, or I get the receipt and you've spent a lot of money, I feel worried about our financial future. Can we talk about that? So see how the tone is different, the approach is different. The goal of a money conversation is not to win somebody over. The goal is to understand them, to be heard, and to be able to engage in the conversation calmly. And so using I statements and actively listening really helps in that dialogue. The next tip that I call out is don't mind read. Mind read is assuming that you know what the other person's going to say before they say it. As I shared earlier, I'm good at this one, or I'm good at breaking the rule on this one, but I'm working on it. And so mind reading, what it does is if you tell somebody what they think they're going to say, or what you think they're going to say, it makes somebody feel unheard. And the dilemma with mind reading is the longer you know somebody, the easier it is to fall into this. So if you've been married a long time, if you've been parenting the same child for a long time, if you're an advisor and you've been working with a client for a long time, the familiarity makes our brains go, oh, I've been here before. I've had this conversation before. I know what they're going to say next. But if we do that, then we lose curiosity. We lose the ability to really listen. So be curious. Anytime I feel like I'm going to read my husband's mind, I try really hard to go, oh, I have to be curious here. Because when you're curious, you don't have time to mind read. You don't have time to be defensive. You're just wondering and gathering information. The last tactic that I'm going to highlight is agree to disagree. Money conversations typically are not about instant agreement, tying everything up at a bow. Money's complex. These conversations are sometimes a series of many, many conversations over a lifetime or over a period of time. So agreeing to disagree frees you up. It isn't about we have to agree or I have to prove that I'm right. It's that I want to hear you, you want to hear me. It's about mutual understanding. So if you go into these types of conversations knowing that it's really about just understanding the other person, and if the other person goes in thinking, I want to understand you, you have a much more productive conversation. So use this handout. I literally, when I am working with clients, I will put it right out on the table so we have a visual clue to remind ourselves of what the rules are, what the guidelines are. And then if we break one, which happens, we're human, you can go back and point and say, oh, that's one of the guidelines. So use it as you see fit. Now, if you are somebody who's in a position where you want to talk to next gen, which is pretty broad, it could be a younger child, it could be an adult child, it could be an older adult child. It could be that next gen is your grandkid and it's a Gen Z. There's a variety of ways, but just thinking about the younger generation, thinking about what is important to them. How do you engage in these money conversations? And how do you do it in a way that's not going to feel like a lecture, is not going to feel like they're getting in trouble, and is going to kind of ease that taboo sense of engaging in these conversations. I am a strong believer on capitalizing on teachable moments. Teachable moments are those moments that just arise and you go, oh, this is one of those times where maybe I can build in a money conversation. Typically, life transitions provide many teachable moments. Somebody thinking about going to college, going off to college and having to manage their own money for the first time, getting ready to get married, newly married, buying a house. All of those things really present teachable moments. In fact, in my own life, my niece, Erin, I don't have any kids with my husband, and so we are pretty good aunts and uncles to our nieces and nephews. And so Erin's my only niece, and she called me from after a job interview. She was all excited, and she said, Auntie Kay, that's what she calls me, Auntie Kay, Auntie Kay. I think they want me, but I don't know how to, I don't know how to negotiate. And so that was a great opportunity to have a money conversation. My nephew was buying a new house, and he just asked my opinion on something that had nothing to do with the value of the house, but it opened up a conversation. And make sure that you not only talk to them about what went wrong, but also successes. Again, I think it's important for us to balance out our relationship and our conversations. If they made a mistake, if somebody messed up, then say, what did you learn from that mistake? But also, when they're successful, highlighting what went right. How can you do more of that? Ask about how they want to express their values through their spending, gifting, and investing. Values and socially responsible investing and being socially responsible in general is really important to millennials and Gen Z, and may be important to some of you out there as well. That is a great way to start a conversation. and letting younger people know that you can spend, save, gift, and invest, and do so in a way where you're using your money to express your values. Great conversation. If you do work with an advisor, you can invite the next gen to a meeting and talk with your advisor about whether that next gen could actually set the agenda. That would be interesting to see what they picked and how that conversation could unfold. Now let's go to the other end of the spectrum when we're talking about across generations. Let's talk about aging parents. Aging parents. Many of us don't have money conversations with our elderly parents until they're in a medical crisis. There are statistics that say it's well over 50% of people start talking about money during a medical crisis. What's the downside of that? When our parents are sick, in the hospital, we are not thinking clearly. They are not able to have the same type of conversation. It's just not ideal. It's okay if it's happened to a lot of us, but it's better to proactively engage your aging parents in a money conversation. And I think of someone that I coached. Her name was Kelly, and her father was ill, and the crisis had passed. He had gotten out of the hospital. And she said, I really want to continue talking about money with him. But every time I try to talk about money with him, he just shuts down. He doesn't want to do it. He gets overwhelmed. He says, it's none of my business. And so Kelly and I designed this strategy where she extended a loving invitation to her father. He came every Sunday night to dinner to her house. And she said, Dad, I don't want to pry. I don't want to tell you what to do financially. I just want to make sure that you and I and Mom are prepared should something like this happen again. Would you be willing to each week when you come to dinner, share one little piece of information about your finances with me? Just one. And you could decide which one. I'm not even going to tell you. So I'm going to give you control. And he agreed to this. So every Sunday he'd come over, and one of the things they would do before dinner is he would either share, a financial plan that he had, or their utility bills. He got to choose it. And she said, I just gathered it all up and put it all together. And so over a series of Sundays, they were able to engage in these conversations. Kelly also made a point of talking with her father about his greatest financial success. Parents love to tell you what they've done well, and you can learn from that just like you can learn from the mistakes. The other thing to keep in mind when talking with aging parents is you want to keep the conversation brief. This is true of all money talks, but you want to make sure that the person doesn't get overwhelmed. You want to make sure there's a beginning, middle, and end. And often I say with any money conversation, give yourself a reward when you've had one. When you've had a fearless money talk, reward yourself. It could be with a bowl of ice cream. It could be with a walk around the street, the park. It could be something else, watching your favorite movie together. But it's important to engage in these conversations and remember that when somebody's getting old, it's about allowing them to feel in control, maintaining respect, but also communicating why you want to have these conversations, and then just slowly kind of chipping away at it if they are a little resistant. Okay, so over time, we have talked about 3 tactics for you to break money silence across generations. And so the important thing when you attend a seminar like this is to take action, not huge action, not like I'm going to have a conversation with everybody in my life when I get done with this seminar. That actually, chances are, won't happen. It's not that I don't believe in you. It's that it typically isn't the way people change behaviors. So I put in your handouts a personalized action plan. The idea is for you to download that, and right after this seminar, write out what is one small action you are going to take as a result of being here with us today. It's also important, and you'll write this down in the handout, who you're going to share this action plan with. Is it a friend? Is it a family member? Significant other? Is it an advisor? Because when we write down a goal and when we communicate it verbally, we are much more likely to do it, to change that behavior. So it's important to commit to the change and commit to that action. Now, you haven't had much time to think about this, but I wanted to take a quick poll before we ended today about what is the one action plan you want to take as a result. So you may know already, you may not, but you know what? Pick your best guess here. Fill out this poll. What is one action you plan to take as a result of this webinar? I'm going to explore my money talk mindset more. I'm going to complete the key influencer questionnaire. I'm going to dare to start one money talk I wouldn't have had prior to this seminar. And we'll give you a few more seconds to fill out your choice. There's a lot of other choices, so don't worry. You can share those in our Q&A, what other things you're going to do or ideas that you have. So here are the results. 57% said they were going to explore their mindset. That's cool. 36% said they liked the questionnaire idea, and 14% are going to dare to have that money talk. Awesome. Those are great action items. So let me just finish with one thought, and then we will turn it over for a little Q&A before some additional thoughts by the other speakers. Here is a picture of me skiing, or not skiing very well. And the reason I show you this picture is that I truly believe when it comes to money conversations and changing behaviors, that it's practice, not perfection. And that is true of anything that we try to do that we haven't done before or we haven't done a lot. Now, I live in Vermont. I am an avid alpine skier. I'm pretty good downhill, can make it down anything. However, this past year, I decided to take up backcountry touring, which is basically teleskiing. And for those of you who don't ski, the skis are a little different. The bindings are very different. Instead of having your heels like locked in permanently, your heel comes up like this, and your center of gravity is different. So this is a picture of me going over a very little hill, thinking I was ready to make a turn like I could make it with alpine skis, where they were locked in. What I found is that when your heels are up like this, it's easy to do a header, and I did a header. And my lovely husband decided before he would help me up that he would take a picture of me. And the reason that I share this is because what I did in that moment is what I encourage you to do. I could have beat myself up for, oh, how stupid was that? I should have known better. I could have done it better. Instead, I started hysterically laughing. First of all, I felt like a kid. I mean, obviously, I'm covered head to toe. And I thought, okay, that was silly. I got up, brushed myself off, rebalanced myself, and said, you know what? Next time, I'm going to do a little bit better. And I walked away and I said, what was my success there? My success was I tried it. What was the thing I needed to work on a little bit more? I needed to figure out how to keep my balance with these different bindings. And so for you, as you engage and think about doing a fearless money talk or engaging with somebody in a wealth conversation, think about practice, not perfection. Think about just being human. It's okay. We all are human. And my ask for each and every one of you that are either on the line today or watching this in a replay is dare to have a fearless money talk. One that you wouldn't have had before you attended this seminar. The reason being that if you do so, you will have joined the Breaking Money Silence revolution. And if each and every one of us dares to have one fearless money talk, pretty soon the money talk taboo will be gone. So I thank you so much for your time and attention. I look forward to your questions, and I look forward to hanging out and listening to the rest of the presentation as well. So I'm going to turn it back over to Angela, and we'll continue with the show. Thank you, Angela.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kathleen. And I love what you shared about Lauren Williams and the idea of money privacy. Though I come from a different background, that's something that resonated with me as a key influencer. And I'm going to take the action item to have a talk. And I'm thinking of the Sunday dinners talk that you suggested for aging parents, and thinking it's a way to start the conversation with my teenage son. So thank you for that. And I hope those of you in the audience, you'll think about what tangible step you can take next to assimilate all of the great information we just got Kathleen into something that's actionable for you. So now we're going to hear from two advisors from Halbert Hargrove. We have with us Brian Spinelli and Cecilia Williams, and they're going to talk about how money silences have impacted some of the clients that they work with in different phases of their financial journey. Brian and Cecilia have a couple of things in common. They're great people, and they both joined the firm in 2006. Both of them are certified financial planners and accredited investment fiduciaries. Brian is the chair of Halbert Hargrove's investment committee. He's also a senior wealth advisor. And Cecilia is also a member of that investment committee. She also serves as director of investment operations, and she's chief compliance officer. So Brian, I will start with you. We've talked about the why and the what behind money silence. I just mentioned phases of life. Tell us what we mean at Halbert Hargrove when we talk about life phase investing and life phases.
Okay, great. And I think the host has to start my video because there we go. Thank you. Well, that was wonderful, Kathleen. I really appreciate that because one of the things in our industry that we do, I think, a poor job of having discussions with clients in particular, or even writing articles, is that we talk about perfection. We say, here are the tips, here are the things you need to do right. And we never, ever communicate, you're going to make mistakes along the way. And part of that leads to this slide that you're looking at here. A lot of financial planning has always been focused on linear outcomes, meaning everything happens in a straight line. We're forecasting a line out 30, 40 years, those types of things. We never talk about the bumps. And the idea of life phase investing was something that we created because we felt like traditional financial planning was always focused on age, your risk tolerance, and what sort of spending you were going to do indefinitely. We all know that life is not linear, and that's part of the reason this windy road is on the screen today. Things like you change jobs, your business may not have a particularly good 3 or 4 years. There's job loss, there's family loans, kids need help. Those are things that don't come into a traditional plan. And so what Cecilia and I are going to talk about very briefly today is how we categorize phases of life or phases of financial life, and how we adapt to each of those phases to have those conversations with clients. So I'll hand it over to Cecilia to cover 2 of those phases, and then I'll cover the last phase.
Sure. So talking about a well-lived life, what Halbert Hargrove thinks builds that are these 5 elements: your earning potential, insurance and protection, saving, portfolio and planning, and your legacy. And don't worry, you don't have to remember all of those things. You just have to remember that they all play a part in your financial picture, and some of them may be more important in different phases of your life than others, or that curve in the road that Brian described. So jumping into build and grow, this phase typically coincides with your primary earning years. So it's the years that you're probably buying a home, getting married, thinking about having kids. The thing to know here is that it's all about you. It's about what you make, what you save, and what you protect. So tying that to what Kathleen talked about today, earning potential, that bucket number 1 is so important, and making sure that you are breaking that money silence, having those conversations so you have a good understanding of where you should be going. We know 2021 was already coined the Great Resignation. We know people were leaving their jobs, hopefully for other jobs that are higher paying, but having those conversations as a basis of knowing what you're worth, asking for those, going through those negotiations can have a big impact on your overall wealth 30 years down the road, because you do have a long time horizon that you'll be working. Second is insurance and protection. Again, tying to the breaking money silence. You don't know what to protect if you don't know what you and your spouse's goals are. So talk about what would you want to happen if something were to happen to you or your loved ones. Would you want to stay in the same house? Would you want to make sure that your children's education is still 100% paid for? Those are all conversations you need to have first before you can decide how much life insurance, how much disability insurance you actually need. And lastly, savings. Obviously, we're investment advisors. We talk about this all day long. You obviously need to be saving during the build and grow phase. You have power of compounding on your side. Again, if you're not touching these assets for 20, 30 years, you can be a little bit more aggressive here. And then that way you're a little bit more set up when you're in the transition and distribute and deploy phase. And then the next phase is transition. So you can think of this as the bridge between your primary earning years, the build and grow, and that day that you say goodbye to your job, you're completely retired, you're kind of transitioning between that. So what's important here is that you're still having those saving discussions with your significant other, right? But you're not talking about long-term goals. You're now talking about, what does your retirement look like? Do you really plan to step away completely from your job, or does one of you plan to still continue to work? Again, that'll impact how much you need to save and your investment portfolio. And another big thing here with portfolio and planning, again, this is so important. It's no longer about you. It's not the build and grow phase. It's about your investment portfolio. It's making sure that it's correctly aligned, because you can't probably withstand a lot of market movements as you inch towards that final retirement date. And then Brian, you want to kick off distribute and deploy?
Yeah, and I'll admit the vulnerable part that I have personally is this is probably the phase that I'm dreading the most personally. My colleagues probably know it because I talk about it all the time, but the distribute and deploy phase is a phase where most people are not used to it. And the way to think about it, a lot of our clients started out working at a young age. They worked really hard. They concentrated savings, investing, things like that, and they built it over time. And that takes 2, 3, 4 decades potentially for a lot of them. When you get to the distribute and deploy phase, it's no longer money coming into your account. It's you taking the money that you've been saving over those decades and starting to deploy it and spend it down. And that psychologically is a really difficult phase for most clients. This is a phase where I generally see people struggle. It's not when money's coming into their account, they're earning it. It's really, when do they pull the ripcord and can they do this? And the whole part of the distribute and deploy phase is really starting to pull those levers that you'd worked so hard to build up, how to spend that money, when to spend it, when is it okay to do this? And part of the enjoyment of being an advisor is being able to talk people through this phase and give them that confidence. Yeah, you're going to be okay. You can keep doing what you're doing. You no longer have to worry about the money coming in the way it used to. You've already done all the hard work. Now enjoy it. And that is the phase in particular where you want to break the money silence before you get into it. You really do, because you want to develop a sense of purpose. You want to be able to have a plan. You want to tell your advisor or your friends about your fears of heading into a phase you've never been in before. At least you hadn't been for a couple decades potentially. So really, with the distribute and deploy phase is making sure your portfolio is stable enough to get you through even rough periods, and then also starting to think about there possibly is going to be money left over. How do you want your legacy to move on? And that's really about the distribute and deploy phase of what we're trying to accomplish with clients that fall into that category.
And Cecilia, I'd love to hear from you. If someone is listening and they don't have an advisor, can you talk about working with a fiduciary and why that's important?
Of course, yeah. So I think many people have heard the term fiduciary. There's a lot of written articles about it, but I can break it down. It's such a simple definition. It really is just working with someone who is legally obligated to put your interests before their own, and it's that easy. In application, it really means that they're not looking to sell you products, get commissions, meet a quota. They're really doing everything they can because it makes the most sense for you, your family, and your goals. So we really think working with a fiduciary who can have a fearless money talk with you will put you on a right path to success.
Wonderful. Thank you. So audience, I want to go back to you again and give you a chance to engage. This is the time where you can ask questions. You can ask them of any of our panelists. If you'd like to, we invite you to turn on your video. Again, no pressure. If you're comfortable, we'd love to see your faces. And we'll keep that chat open as questions come in, and then we will direct it to the right person. If you have someone in mind to answer your question, feel free to name them. We're delighted you're still with us and want to make sure that if you have pointed questions, now is the time to ask. You can also ask for a friend if you're embarrassed. I'll just give that a minute in case anybody has something that they want to pose to us. I know one of the things that I've been thinking about is I never thought about how my reticence to admit my financial mistakes actually might hinder other people from sharing theirs. And so I'm thinking about how, not just in this world of advising, but in my personal relationships, how I can share about that more freely in the hopes it will give other people permission to do the same, because that's really important. I think sometimes, especially in this industry, as Brian said, we tend to talk about the things that we can do right, but we all do things wrong because, as Kathleen reminded us, we're human. It's going to happen. So it's good to normalize that for each other.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point, Angela and Brian. I think it's just role modeling that our relationship with money is imperfect and that, we're in it together. I'm looking forward to seeing what the questions are, whether they're for me or someone else.
I have one now, and the question is, when you're trying to save, how do you balance savings for all the different buckets? So Brian, I'll start with you on this one. And if either you, Cecilia or Kathleen, want to jump in, feel free after.
So when you say saving for different buckets, I'll take a kind of out on a limb, and there's something that we're actually working on writing at the moment, but one of the questions we get all the time is, how do we save for retirement and save for our kids' educations? Because those are two big pieces. And one of the things we always go back to is with education, you can finance it. I know that's, some people go, I don't want to do that. You cannot finance retirement. And so retirement, if you're really going to do that and it's something you want to do, we're not telling retirement's not for everybody, by the way. But if it's something you want to do, that's something you got to get on early and start doing often and make it a regular contribution to that bucket, because I haven't found a bank yet willing to give us a loan after somebody retires and say, I'm never going to pay it back. I'm just going to use your money to cover my lifestyle. That doesn't work. With education, you can at least say, hey, there's going to be an earning stream in the future and so forth. But the buckets, you got to look at what's something that you absolutely want and start prioritizing it, because unfortunately, most people can't just fill all the buckets equally.
Great, that's really helpful. I have a question actually directly for Kathleen. This person asks, they admit, I struggle with reading people's minds, mostly my spouse. So Kathleen, what are some tips or suggestions that you have to work on that?
We should start a self-help group is what we should do. I think that curiosity is such an important thing. And I had said that before, but often if I want to say to somebody, or I'm coaching somebody that mind reads, instead of saying, making a statement and reading their mind, turn it into a question. So if I want to say to my husband, I know that you're gonna, here's a real life one. I know you were just looking to buy me a mountain bike because you want a mountain bike. That's not very nice, but that's Brian identifies with this one. And so instead I'll go something along the lines of, I'm really curious. You're shopping for a mountain bike for me right now. Do you have any plans in the future to buy a mountain bike? You see how you flip it? And do you see how it's different? I'm not always perfect with it. So I think the person who asked, it's slowing down, taking a deep breath and go, how could I turn that into a question? Or how can I tap into what I'm curious about to test out my hypothesis, as opposed to just share my hypothesis? And hopefully that's helpful.
That's wonderful. Okay, I have another one. So this person says, my husband's mother has not saved well, and we're worried about how she's going to care, how we are going to care for her, but she's not been willing to discuss this with us. She loved the dinner idea, but not sure that her mother-in-law would be open to that. So Kathleen, why don't you start? What are some tips there? And then Brian or Cecilia, if you have ideas for that, you chime in as well.
I think one of the things that I would do is find a time that you do think would be right for this person. It's not always dinner. It typically is not a holiday or some big celebration where you are with the parent and it is quiet, and you have a moment to just say, once again, it's the loving intent. I'm concerned about, be specific without being judgmental. So I'm concerned about us not talking about finances. I want to make sure that you're taken care of. And then, instead of trying to have the money conversation, then say, when do you think would be a good time for us to have a conversation? Like 10 minutes, keep it short, and giving them a sense of control over that. The other thing is, if it can also be giving them options. I know you don't want to talk about this, if they've said they don't want to talk about this, I know you don't want to talk about the savings, but would you be willing to just talk with me about what you would like if you're in a situation where you're solo and we need to kind of take care of you so we can plan, like giving them some options as to what you'd talk about. And then I think the other thing is just to kind of let them know and reassure them directly, we are not going to try to control you financially. We just want to be helpful. And I don't know how to do that unless I hear from you, because usually the underlying fear is you're going to take all my control away. So those are the psychological pieces. I'm sure that Brian and Cecilia will have some maybe more concrete financial ways to approach it as well.
The only thing I can add to that is if you don't have a lot of information, you could probably estimate, ballpark things, put pen to paper there, and then present it to the mother. Then she can help adjust. So it's already, something's already tangible for her that maybe she can just make adjustments to instead of starting from scratch, something that's, overwhelmingly scary for them to talk about. It might make it a little easier.
I love that idea, because then they're reacting to something as opposed to creating something. That's a great idea.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing, I mean, just to add, it doesn't work for everybody, but we have, and Kathleen, you touched on this very early in your conversation. It's small things over a long period of time, one thing at a time, and slowly just getting involved or helping in that area, taking that opportunity. It may not be on your time schedule. Like that, I'm a control freak, so I hate when things aren't on my time schedule. So I always have to take a step back and realize it's going to be on their time schedule, and we're going to have to do it in bite-sized chunks, not all at once. But getting that utility bill was a great example.
Yeah, it can be really small.
It was really small, but that's a great example.
So I have another one that dovetails with that previous question. Someone's looking for suggestions to help their 97-year-old mother not to fear about running out of money. So Brian, just because you started with this in your distribute and deploy about how anxious that phase is when there's not money coming in but going out, where would you start with this person?
Not knowing the full situation, obviously, but if they are open about their finances and they, let's say, for example, and I'm going to use just round numbers here. Let's say they have $100,000 saved and they only spend $10,000 a year. It's just simply saying, hey, look, you got 100,000, you got another 10 years of living that you can do without even having to worry. That tells you you're pretty well funded for the next 10-year period, even if you're not investing, things like that. I'm just talking very basically, and sometimes that simple ratio, that simple, here's what your expenses are and here's what you have, can clear it up, and they go, oh, okay. It's a simple number. It's not this long drawn out forecast and simulation that they don't understand.
And Kathleen, I'm going to direct this to you. Someone asked for some simple resources about reading for financial and investment related topics, specifically for their spouse. They found that learning through the discussion isn't working because their spouse becomes frustrated. So hoping there's another way to kind of get the ball rolling.
Sure, I'm going to answer that. I want to jump back really quickly to this 97-year-old woman. I love what Brian said, and it's something that I would recommend: concrete, simple. I think the other thing is often having a conversation about that worry, about that concern, because our tendency is to take that concern away. And so one of the things I would ask is a little bit about, their parents, or her parents, excuse me, and, or where did she get this idea that she's going to run out of money? How did her parents do this phase of their life? Just to try to understand where it's coming from, and then, and also do the concrete. I think together that can be really useful. To switch gears to the next question about resources, two things. And I don't know if this person would be willing to put more in chat, but when you say that your spouse is not, it's not going well with the conversations, and maybe having, reading a book or something would be useful, there's two ways that this could go. One is, my question to you is, are you assigning the book? And if you are, you might want to take a step back. If you are saying a book might be useful because this is how my partner learns, maybe figuring out a book or something that you could do together, read together, and it's externalized. So you're talking about the book. This is me holding a book, the book, as opposed to talking about money directly. That can be really, really useful. Now, with that said, it depends on where your spouse's interests lie. So I'll tell you about some of the money, like more the behavioral stuff, and I'm sure others can tell you more of the technical things. I really like the book called Money Psychology. I actually listened to it on tape. It's literally, that's the title. It's that simple. It's fairly new. It's really interesting about all the different ways in which money psychology impacts us, impacts our relationship with investments. And it's done in a way where he shares history and tidbits, so it doesn't feel like a financial book, but you learn about a lot about finance and about behavioral finance. I also think, and this is probably going to be too young for your spouse, but there's a book that was written a long time ago, How to Stand on Your Own 2 Feet, really good for adult women, 20 to 30. And also, I have to shamelessly self-promote, and I think Breaking Money Silence, my 5th book, would be a great book for you to read. It has activities in it. There is a section at the end of each chapter that might be an activity that you and your partner could do together. And if you can't do it together, you might be able to do it separately and then later talk about what your answers were. So those are my ideas in my area of expertise. I'll throw it over to you two for other thoughts.
I don't
any
have
other
any,
thoughts?
Brian. Yeah, Brian, do you have any to recommend?
No, you did a great job on that.
Yeah, you're the resource expert. Thank you, Kathleen.
Okay.
Cecilia, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, if those don't hit your sweet spot, just send a chat through and I can get you some more resources with the area that you're looking for. Being an author, I know a lot of authors that have written a lot of good stuff.
Great. So I have a couple questions specifically about people in transitional periods. So one person asked, and I'll start with you, Cecilia, and you can give more of the tactical stuff. And then, of course, Kathleen, please bring your wealth psychology expertise to this as well. So they're just asking simply, what are some questions I need to ask during a divorce?
Oh, that is a good one. So lucky for me, unfortunately, I am not one, but at Halbert Hargrove, we do have certified divorce financial analysts that have helped many people, many of our clients work through divorce. But I think the basics of it is making sure you understand your financial picture, because I think some spouses stay very uninformed throughout the relationship where one is handling most. You should have a basic understanding of how your money flows throughout your household. I think that would be step one. And I think the questions usually are derived from that, and making sure that you know the income coming in, you know what's going out, because obviously that will all have to be split. And you want to make sure that you're protected, you have as much information as possible. So starting from that, and there'll probably be many, many more questions after that, but I think that would be for me, the best step to start with.
Great.
So the
Anything
only other thing I'm going to throw in is in terms of going through this transition, that often there's various phases that people go through. One of the things, if you are anticipating a divorce or you're in the midst of a divorce, is this is where your emotions aren't always your friend. And I'm not for not having emotions or not acknowledging them for obvious reasons. But when we think about like splitting assets, one of the things that typically will happen for a lot of mothers actually, but it can happen for anybody, is you get so attached to the house that you forget to really look at the full picture, not only the short term, but the long term, and what it means if you're going to take that asset, which actually is going to cost you money over time, versus whether you're going to take some investment asset that will appreciate over time. So the emotions, that's where I think working with a professional and a CDFA and a financial advisor can be really useful. In those transitions, there's a lot of material out there around transitioning through divorce. Some of it you may have available at the firm, and there are some books that I could also recommend. They're not top of mind in terms of titles, but they're out there, and I can let you know them.
Excellent. Brian, I'm going to pose the next question to you. This is again, someone dealing with a tricky possible transitional situation in life. She has an elderly mother who still works, and she says that her mom spends every nickel she makes, and it makes her feel really stressed out because her mom doesn't have anything saved for end of life, and she's thinking that could end up on her. So how would you begin to advise someone in that situation?
Ooh, you gave me the tough one. There's no easy answer on that one. I mean, the first question is her mom just planning to work through this forever? I mean, that is some people's plan, that they just want to work until they just can't. That might be the plan. I don't know the answer to that one. The other is if they're so inclined, it's not their obligation. If they're so inclined, they can start putting some money away for that potential claim hitting them at some point in the future. But at the end of the day, I always tell people, look, if your goals are X, Y, and Z, and one of those big goals that always seems to come our way is retirement being an idea or an objective, you can't put that at risk over somebody else's decisions. I know that's a really hard thing to say, but it's probably one of the hardest things that we have to tell people is, look, if your goals are first, sometimes that means saying no to somebody that didn't plan the way you are. I know it's not the easiest thing to say, but it is, that is a fearless conversation we have to have.
The only other thing that I would say is, thinking about your money personality, how you tend to relate to money and think about savings versus your mom. And if they're, and appreciating the different personalities, it may be that even having a conversation about that to just gather more information about mom's philosophy might be useful. And then maybe should be open to this, if you work with an advisor, having her come in to an advisory meeting, not to get in trouble or get scolded, but to kind of facilitate that conversation and see, because Brian is right. I mean, I think the hardest part is when our parents or our clients or our partners don't have the same goals as us. There isn't much we can do about that. But I think the exploration and the conversation is about the different philosophies might be open something up that would be helpful for you.
Great insight, both of you. Thank you. I think I'm going to do one more question and then we'll start to wrap things up. And the final question has to do with, actually, I have another one that I'm going to go to. This is specifically for Brian. And it says, in a portfolio designed for stability, what would be a good rate of return to expect?
Does this person know me? This is a very tricky question because stability means different things to most investors. And I will say that I've seen investors say stability means I never go down 1%. and some will call it, I could go down 5% and that's stable to me. But honestly, we are in a period right now where anything that I would consider stable, so something that is almost guaranteed, think of cash savings at a bank, you're going to end up with 0 to maybe 0.5%, depending on where it is. Take a little bit step further out where you might have a little variation day to day, and you might be lucky to get 1 to 2% over and that's on an annualized basis going forward for the next few years. It's a really difficult environment with federal interest rates being very low, global interest rates being very low, to have any stable assets earning anything that's going to make you jump for joy at this point. But stability means a lot of different things to some people. So I always have to ask the question, what are you willing to deal with day to day as far as ups and downs that allow you to call that asset stable? The more you're willing to deal with the ups and downs, usually you should be able to get higher rates of return than what I just mentioned.
Great, thank you. Thank you, the three of you, so much for sharing your time and expertise. And for those of you who stayed, I mentioned at the beginning we'd have a special offer. And that is because we want to be a resource for you as whatever the next step is for you in those action items that Kathleen mentioned at the beginning. But if you're ready for a Fearless Money Talk and you want to have it with someone who has expertise, there's 2 ways to do that. And you can schedule a free, no obligation consultation with the Halbert Hargrove advisor. You can engage with us through our website. You can go to halberthargrove.com/connect and put in your contact information there, and we will be in touch with you. Or you can email us directly at hhteam@hhga.com. Also, feel free to engage with us after today if there's a question you felt too shy about posting, and we can get in touch with you personally. And before we close, I just want to encourage you again to go back to what was it about this topic, breaking money silence, that interested you and prompted you to join our discussion today, and then take that a step further. And what can you do with that? How has it changed shape, and what's the next step you can take? So we wish you some fearless money talks in the future, and we are here to resource you if you would like our help. Thank you so much.